Madam Clerk, we good? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. It's so nice to see you all again. I hope everyone here today got through the pandemic in a healthy manner with not only yourselves, your friends and loved ones as well. So it's great that we're all here, and I much appreciate this forum as opposed to the Zoom. But I got to tell you, the people with the city did a heroic job getting us able to conduct these meetings by Zoom. So we didn't miss a beat, but it's a pleasure to be back. All right, so this is our June meeting of the Board of Adjustment. This afternoon, we'll consider a request for an area variance at 405 Stokely Street Extension. The homeowners seek an area variance allowing them to keep a 4-foot-high fence which encroaches over the setback required on the side of their yard, which runs along School Lane. We thank the members of the public who are here or who are watching this meeting for your interest in our work. If you want to speak, you'll be allowed to speak, but please limit your comments to the issues before the board. Everyone who chooses to speak during the hearing will be required to give their testimony under oath, and I will be asking our attorney, Mr. Townsend, to administer the oath to whoever chooses to speak. So let's start working our way through today's agenda. The roll call, I'll do the roll call. I can see that all the members are here, so we have a full complement today. Am, to you, could you please explain to me how we went about publishing notice and whether all the legal requirements were met?
The agenda was published on, the agenda was published on June 21st and posted the same day, amended the 23rd, and reposted on the 23rd. The public notice for this specific case was posted on June 1st. It was sent out to Cape Gazette twice, Coast Press once, and Delaware State News twice. I don't have the specific information, but it was done timely.
Okay.
Signage was posted on the property, and property owners within 200 feet of the property were notified. That's all I have.
Okay, it appearing that all the requirements were met, let's continue on.
Jerry?
Yes.
If I could just interject, for the audiences here, my name is Randy Mason. I am without a name tag, and I just thought it would be good to mention so you know why I'm sitting up here. And Ann has promised me one for next meeting.
So we're at the correspondence section. Did we receive any correspondence? Okay, and we're moving right along. Okay, now we're up to the point where we are asked to approve the minutes of our last meeting. So I did get copies of those minutes dated March 22nd, 2021. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I would make a motion to approve the minutes of March 22nd.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
I'm abstaining because I wasn't here for that meeting.
4 in favor and 1 abstention. Jan Conacy abstaining. Next is the old business. Is there any old business? All right, at some point, let's make it the next meeting. I'd like to discuss setting a time for these regular meetings, okay? We're meeting at 1:30 today. Previously, we would meet at 5 o'clock. At some point, it was earlier, it was at 7 o'clock, but I like the afternoon meetings. And so when we meet next, let's try to set a time. I would prefer either 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the fourth Monday of the month. All right, we're at new business. Now we're at the point where we are going to discuss the case on the agenda today. So I'm going to ask the parties to introduce themselves. Mr. Robertson, I know you, but do you have your clients here?
Yeah, sure. Again, Vince Robertson, and I'm with Parkowski, Girk, and Swayze here on behalf of Angela Murray and Teresa Crivelli. who are in the audience. Y'all want to give a wave? And then also we're here with Mike Lynn and Greg Donahue from Select Builders. And then Melissa Thorogood's also here. She's one of the neighbors. So.
Okay. And Mr. Janis is here for this city. And
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mandalis as well. Okay. Thank you. We're ready to begin. I'm going to ask Mr. Janis to make your presentation, please.
Certainly. Thank you. And it's great to see everybody's face on live instead of a computer screen. All right. Before you today is case number 0521-02. The location is 405 Stokely Street Extended. The applicants / owners are Angela H. Murray and Teresa Ann Crivelli of 19776 Keystone Drive here in Rehoboth Beach and 19971. The subject is to allow a 6-foot fence to encroach into a required 10-foot yard side setback. Nature of the request is the applicants Angela H. Murray and Teresa Ann Crivelli are requesting a variance to section 27024 building setback lines to allow a 4-foot required fence to encroach the minimum 10-foot setback. What they're proposing is a 6-foot fence, but the minimum is a 4-foot fence because of the pool requirements required by the code for barrier requirements for the newly constructed pool. The property is located at 405 Stokely Street Extended and identified as Sussex tax map number 334-20.05-07.01 and Rehoboth parcel ID number 5400. The lot is located on the northeast corner of the intersection of Stokely Street Extended and School Lane. It is a 50-foot by 145-foot lot with 50-foot facing Stokely Street Extended, where the property derives its addressing from and is zoned R1. The newly constructed residence is approximately 3,060 square feet in size. Application background information. The applicant submitted plans for new construction on January 30th, 2020. Included with the submission is a proposal from Sussex Fence Company and a site plan showing the potential location of the pool and fencing. Upon review, the inspector noted the height of the fence and noted on a return document to see fencing restrictions, corner lot, Exhibit A, which I provided for you. Submitted at time of initial application, a document showing the extent of ENS control plan, erosion and sediment control, was marked as approved for ENS only. The pool location was later revised as the proposed construction required the removal of a 40-inch diameter white oak tree. The city arborist recommended relocation of the pool to retain the specimen tree and decrease mitigation requirements set forth by the tree ordinance. You'll see that in Exhibit B. A survey was submitted dated February 3rd, 2021, after an inspector passed the property and noticed that the pool construction was close, if not over the rear setback line. After further investigation, it was determined the initial pool dig was encroaching the rear setback line by 5 feet. The revised site plan was stamped approved with the comment, revised pool location only. That's Exhibit C. The recommendation, although it seems harsh, it's pretty fair with our code. The recommendation is to deny the application for a variance. The applicant should be directed to correct the issue and allow the building inspector to verify compliance of the setback ordinance both on site and by submitting a signed and sealed survey showing the corrected fence location. As the property, I'm sorry about that. The property is not currently for sale, and that is a mistype. If the applicant fails to comply by the date, a penalty of up to $250 should be imposed until the issue has been resolved. Typically, we give 30 days for this kind of compliance. So I think a 30-day time window would be appropriate here. My apologies for the typo.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Robertson?
Thank you. Since I already introduced myself, I won't do so again, but I echo everybody else's sentiments. It's good to be in person and see everybody live and everybody's smiling faces. The second thing is, I'm hesitant to say this, but at the risk of jinxing it, I hope this one will be less controversial than some of the other ones you've seen me at here at the Board of Adjustment in the past. So with that, what I'd like to do, I'm going to switch up my presentation a little bit based on Mr. Janis's statements. I want to correct a few things that are in his report. The first thing that he said was that the subject is to allow a 6-foot fence to encroach into the required 10-foot side yard setback. We're not asking for a 6-foot fence. We're asking for 6 inches above the 42-inch fence that's permitted there. There is a 6-foot fence there now that was discovered, which I'll get to at sort of the end of the story. But one of the requirements for a Board of Adjustment variance application is that you seek the minimum relief possible. And so that's what we're doing. I just want to be clear, we're not asking for a 6-foot fence. We're asking for a 48-inch fence, which is 6 inches taller than what's permitted. I appreciate Mr. Janis making that correction about the property being for sale. It is not. They did buy this home, or actually construct it. It was a custom home for them. And as noted on Mr. Janis's report, they lived just outside the city of Rehoboth, and moved into the city so that this could be their permanent residence. Not a second home. It's not an investment property. They live there. And one of the reasons they live there is because it's in close proximity to all the great sports courts and stuff at the Rehoboth Elementary School. So I just wanted to make that point. I also have to object to the recommendation to deny the application for a variance that was in the report for a couple reasons. We understand why we have to come to the board. We have to request a variance. That's because we need some relief from what's in the code, and we have to prove under the legal standards whether that relief is justified or appropriate or not. We're not appealing Mr. Janis's determination, and I understand that he would want to defend that if we were appealing it. So I don't think it's appropriate to recommend denial, particularly when there's no citation to any of the reasons set forth in Quick Check or any of the legal standards that apply to a variance application. And me and Mr. Mandelis have had that conversation, and I think he would agree with me on that at least, that you can't just make that summary statement in a building inspector's narrative. I'd also object to it because it's contrary to what was specifically told to my clients and their builder separately and on different occasions. And this is important because I think it sort of goes to the facts of this case in terms of whether or not it's appropriate to grant the variance. When Mr. Janis and Ms. Lingo were at the property for an inspection towards the end of the construction and discussed the variance that had been filed, Mr. Janis specifically advised her that I wrote up a response and stated the facts. I don't state opinions, and that goes counter to the recommendation for denial. He also stated separately to Greg Donahue, who's the project superintendent, if it was up to me, I would not have a problem with the 4-foot fence because it does not obstruct views or traffic. And I would say, I'm not trying to get Mr. Janis in trouble. That's an appropriate statement. I mean, that happens all the time in conversations with building officials because you have the code on one hand, and we're saying, okay, well, we got to apply for a variance. I don't object to it. Just go forward, go to the Board of Adjustment. But those two statements were contrary to what was in the narrative from Mr. Janis. So going back to having said that to my presentation, just so you all know too, Boards of Adjustment, usually we have to have sworn testimony. It's my feeling that gets cumbersome. If I ask questions, they answer it. I ask questions, they answer it. So what I'm going to do is give a statement, ask them to come up, be put under oath, and confirm that, and maybe have just a few questions for them. I think it'll go smoother for everybody involved. So it is 405 Stokely Street, and it is, and if we could, hopefully I'm aiming good. I don't know. Yeah, there we go. It's on the corner of Stokely Street and School Lane. School Lane kind of wraps around, if you're familiar with that, it makes a big L shape all over there by the elementary school. It is right across from the Rehoboth Elementary School. Really, it faced the backside of the gym of the old elementary school, but now it's where all the pickleball courts, the basketball courts, the playground, and the parking lot are located. As I said, it was a custom-built home on the property by select builders. It is a corner lot. As Mr. Janis said, it is a bigger lot. It's 50 feet wide, but 145 feet deep. That makes it 7,250 square feet. And as I said, it's fronts on the school property. One thing, too, that I wanted to give some context of this as we go forward, and I think it's a fair point to everybody involved in this whole situation. Virtually from when this was submitted through, well, really almost now, we were all, and by all I mean the builder, my clients, me, you, the building and licensing department, the whole city were in COVID. So what does that mean? City Hall was completely shut down. And okay, we all get that, but for a builder, that eliminates a lot of the back and forth, the good conversations that happen. And if you pull a building permit, if you submit a building permit, what generally happens is there's at some point a meeting with building and licensing staff and the builder, and maybe the owner, on the conference room down the hall. Everybody's got that spread out, and they're looking over it and talking through it and making sure there's not any issues. Because we're in COVID, obviously that doesn't happen. What happens in this case, and I'm not going to submit it as exhibit, but there's an email from the city, which is their standard one. You know, it's ready. You get an email notice that it's ready. You go down to the police department, pick it up. You got to submit your check to the police department. All the back and forth happens through the police department like you're paying a traffic fine or something, you know? I mean, and I agree with Mr. Capone. The city did a great job getting through COVID, but trying to work through construction plans, it's clunky at best. So I just wanted to point that out because I think that's a fair statement that there was no direct contact with anybody explaining what we're doing or asking questions just because it's simply, you know, what we had to deal with. So from day one, the house plans included a pool in the backyard of the home. And yeah. And so you can see on there that there's the pool, and in this case, on this set of plans, the pool's on the northwest corner of the house or the backyard. So to orient yourselves, so here's, I don't know if you can see me, here's the house for Hope Elementary is this way. Melissa Thurgood's house is up that way. There's houses this way, and then schooling goes back like that, and then there's a house over here. So there was always that pool shown on there, and there was always a fence that's shown on there. You can see that as well. The fence goes all the way back around like this, and then back to the house, so around that whole backyard area. And that's consistent throughout all the plans. Yeah, honestly, if this was a lot in the internal section of a block or a street, it wouldn't even be an issue because it'd be a side yard and we'd be fine. But since this house has two sides, the rule applies to the property along School Lane. And again, as Mr. Janis pointed out, we're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place in that you can only have a 42-inch high fence on the perimeter of the lot, but you have to have a 48-inch high fence or minimum 48-inch high fence around a pool. That's what we're dealing with, you know, those two things butting up against one another. So the plans for the home that you see here were submitted on January 30, 2020. And as I mentioned, the pool was at the northwest corner. And again, always showed the fence on the property line, and the plans were reviewed that way. And the building permit application contained all the details for the structures on the property, including the details of the fence height, which was 48 inches. I'm not going to bore you with the details of that, but all that stuff was submitted in here. It's about an inch thick, including the fence details. And this is what went back and forth by email and through the police department. So, and I'm not going to submit it, but just to show you kind of what we're talking about. So Mr. Janis claims that there was a drawing that was returned with a question about the fence requirements on the corner lot, and that's what was attached to his building inspector report. Our contractor will testify that he never saw that document. The other thing is, if you look at the exhibit that was attached, it says, see fence restrictions corner lot. I would just submit to the board that that reference to corner lot doesn't even apply to this situation, because when you look at section 270.43, which deals with fences, actually part B of that section talks about corner lots, and it says, on a corner lot, there shall be no building, structure, wall, fence, shrubbery, or planting erected or altered if such obstructs street traffic visibility within the triangular area formed by the intersection of any two street lines and a line joining the respective points on each of these lines 20 feet distance from their point of intersection. What DelDOT would call that is a daylighting requirement, just so that you can see around a corner. And as you can see, there's no fence at the front of this. What we're talking about is on the back of the lot. So I'm not sure that that note even has anything to do with this application. But more importantly, what we have is the building inspector's narrative from back in April 2020, when it was approved, and there's no mention of any issue with the fence or fences at all. And again, that was in his plan review narrative. What I'd like to do on this one is just hand this out. I don't expect you to read it, but just so it's in the record. I'll just submit to you that there's no reference to any fence issues in that plan narrative. So as they're going through the plan review, sort of the next thing that happens is in the backyard, there is a 40-foot or taller, actually it's a big one, oak tree in the middle of where the pool was going to go as shown on that plan. So when they're going through plan review, Ms. Murray, Ms. Gravella, Mr. Lynn, who's again the builder, and Liz Lingo walked the site, and Ms. Lingo suggested that the house or the pool be redesigned to save that tree. So while the plan review process was going forward in February 2020, my clients and their contractor notified the city that the pool would be relocated to avoid the tree and allow it to be maintained. So a new plan was submitted in March of 2020. Which shows the pool relocated up to the other side of the backyard, that tree being preserved, and the same fence all the way around the whole backyard. The fence was always on the property line. There wasn't any fence shown internally anywhere else. So one thing to note on here, because it comes up, that pool actually is located 10 feet from the rear property line. And that's relevant as we get down the road. But also what's important is this plan shows not one but two approvals by the city of Rehoboth Beach. You see in the right-hand side it was approved, and then also in the middle it was approved on April 23, 2020. And I would say this approval also followed, I think Mr. Lynn said there was about 13 different emails dealing with all sorts of things, including lot coverage and particularly FAR back and forth, and there was never any mention of the fence issue. It just never came up, as evidenced by the fact that this plan was approved with the fence shown where it is. So there was a call then, after this was submitted and approved on April 29, 2020, and there was a conference call, again, about the building permit being ready. The fence wasn't brought up, and then the documents were picked up at the police department. And if you see attached to that narrative, there's approved building permit number 2107 for the home and the pool and the fence. There's the building permit placard that goes in the window or on the property. The tree permit placard that goes on the property. And again, there was the approved site plan that's up on the screen without any, and the building inspector's narrative was attached with that packet as well, and there wasn't any mention of the fence at all. Noteworthy is it did not include that document that was attached to the building inspector's report. So based on that, construction starts in accordance with all those approvals. House is built, the pool is dug, or excavated, I suppose is the better word. Anyway, so almost a year later, in 2021, there's a site visit with Ms. Lingo about the landscaping plan, the trees, etc. And Ms. Lingo at that point notices that the pool appeared too close to the rear lot line. So based on that realization, my clients and their builder consulted with the city, and at a cost to them of around $12,000, the pool is re-excavated and relocated, and a third site plan is submitted. So that's an April 3, 2021 site plan. I just realized too, in case you all want to, here's copies of these site plans that I've been referring to. So this one's also approved. There's no mention of the fence again, and the fence is still in the same location on the site plan. So the plan's approved and construction continues. And actually, now the pool's in, the house is done, the fence is there, the tree is preserved. As I said, the fence is in place. with gates, and it's integrated into the side yards and the house, and also the landscaping. The landscaping's all in place. Importantly, the entire irrigation system is installed. And also important to the pool, Section 206.11 of the city codes requires there to be a pool discharge plan. You have to submit that, which I didn't know until I looked at this today. You actually have to show sort of an area where you're going to discharge into. That pool discharge plan is in accordance with these plans, which puts that inside the fence. If we had to relocate the fence to the setback, we'd have the pool discharge plan area straddled by a fence, which is not workable for anybody. So after all that's done, the city then told my clients and their contractor that a new separate fence needs to be at least 48 inches in height to surround the pool on the inside of the setback. And I mentioned again that was never stated during any of the plan reviews. The issue with that is that, again, interferes with that big oak tree that we wanted to save. It interferes with that pool discharge plan. It would require them to redo all the landscaping. They'd have to redo all of the irrigation. They'd have to redesign the pool discharge plan. They'd have to redesign the patio design and potentially a fire pit, all of which affects lot coverage and natural area calculations that the city has, and would essentially make the yard unusable, carved up by fences all over the place. So in light of all of that, we're asking for 6 inches in additional fence height. That's what this boils down to. So what I do need to do is hit sort of the highlights on the legal requirements. And so I'm going to go through those really quickly. We have to look at the nature of the zone where the property lies. Here it's somewhat of a mixed-use residential area. As I mentioned, it's residential on one side. It's sort of institutional, educational on the other side with the Rehoboth Elementary School's playground, tennis and pickleball courts, and the basketball courts. I would point out that the tennis and pickleball courts actually have their own chain link fences that are probably 12 feet tall right across the street. The fence won't be out of character, and that extra 6 inches of fence height will not even be apparent to the eye. The other requirement is the character of the immediate vicinity and the uses therein. As I mentioned, it's somewhat of a mixed-use area with the homes, the school, the playgrounds, and sport courts. In addition to the fences that go around the pickleball and tennis courts, actually on one part of the school property, there is a perimeter fence that's probably at least 5 feet tall right on the property line. I would also state that in that area along Stokely Street Extended and School Lane, there are a variety of landscaping types, home styles, fences, and as I mentioned, everything that goes along with the school uses. In furtherance of that, I did some driving around today. And there's a fence. I'm always reluctant to do this just because I feel like I'm maybe throwing somebody under the bus. But right across the street is a 48-inch fence. This is a picture of it. It's 502 Newcastle Street Extended. It's on the corner of School Lane and Newcastle Street Extended. There's actually, if you go out that street and turn on State Road and Lee Street, kind of, I don't know where one begins and the other is. So it's like State and School Lane back around the corner. There's actually in the same neighborhood, there's a 6 foot tall white vinyl fence that surrounds the pool right on the property line, right on State Road. So I'm just saying the neighborhood has all sorts of fences all over the place. So this one, I don't think you'd be able to realize that it's 42 versus 48, but certainly it's not inconsistent with what's in the area. The effect of the variance on other properties, if granted, as I mentioned, I don't think it'll have any material effect. We have some strong evidence of that since in the record with the application, we submitted signatures from folks that were in favor of it. As I mentioned, I don't think it'll be apparent when you look at the property. And as I mentioned, there's the one right across the street. Conversely, we have to look at the effect of not granting the variance on the applicant. If it's not granted after all the plan reviews and approvals, the property inspections, the plan revisions, the efforts to maintain the oak tree, redesign the pool, get the pool permits approved and designs approved, and finally the building permits, my clients, again, if it wasn't granted, would have to redesign or redo their landscaping, which again has all been already reviewed and signed off on by Ms. Lingo. They'd have to install a completely new fence in a new location that was never shown on any of the approved plans. They would have to redo the irrigation system on that side of the yard. If you can imagine, you have sprinklers that would just splash a fence and not do anything else, plus the pipes that are in the ground that would have to be re-excavated. Likely have to redesign the entire patio area and pool decking. And as I mentioned, that's one thing, but in the city, it's not that you can just redesign something. You have to recalculate all the lot coverage and natural area that goes with that. So it's not as simple as it might seem. And one of the things, there was that redesign early in the process, before the building permit was issued, to protect that big oak tree so that it would survive. We're concerned that if you start having to dig footers for a fence right up against that oak tree, that's going to adversely affect the root structure for the oak tree, there was that cooperation to make sure that the oak tree is not harmed. So, again, I would just point out that those adverse effects versus 6 inches that nobody would even see, when you do the balancing of it, it seems like that sort of comes out in favor of just allowing the 6-inch fence to occur. In that regard, too, I showed you at the beginning, there's a 6-foot vinyl fence. We understand that has to be shaved off at 48 inches to make it the 48-inch fence. We're not asking to keep that white vinyl fence. At the beginning of this, I talked about one of the requirements is that we have to make sure that the variance request is minimal. It wouldn't be if we were asking for 6 feet, I suppose, but we're not asking for 6 feet. We're just asking for the 6 inches. So I think when you take into account the totality of the circumstances, the cooperation with the city along the way, the fact that we're in the midst of COVID, where nobody could meet and have this conversation and really go over the plans in fine-tooth detail, that it's appropriate to look favorably on the grant of this really minimal variance. So with that, what I'd like to do is bring some of my witnesses up just to confirm what I've had, just ask them a few questions if we could. So if we could start with Ms. Murray. Angela? Who, me? How do you want to just have her there? Yeah. Yeah, that's fine, just as far as you need to be sworn in, so.
So name and address for the record, maybe?
Okay, yeah, if you could give your name and address.
Angela Murray, 405 Stockley Street Extended, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware.
Ms. Murray, do you affirm the testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
And you can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. So you've heard everything I've said. Do you agree with everything that I've stated?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'd like to just note that we do not live or own Keystone anymore. We sold that house when we moved into 405 Stockley Street Extended. So that is our primary residence, where we are hoping that's going to be the last residence we have, in a positive light.
So, okay. That was going to be my other question, to make sure that you weren't selling. So thank you for jumping ahead.
Sorry about that.
Streamlined it. That's fine. Is there anything else that you'd like to add with regard to the application?
The only thing I would like to add is the entire bill through COVID has touched everyone's lives, and it has been extremely stressful for everyone involved. And we've tried along the way to be very understanding under the circumstances, even at great financial lengths, and making changes to things. As Vince mentioned, we're more than welcome to modify it to 48 inches, and we're just really offering for 6 inches, so we're not once again having to shell out thousands of dollars and potentially making our yard unuseful and potentially dangerous because of how close everything's going to be with the encroachment on the pool. So we really would appreciate, as Vince says, the 6 inches and this consideration of the overall situation.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Unless there's any questions from you all.
Anybody have any questions for this witness? Nope, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lynn, if you could come forward. And if you could state your name and address for the record.
Yes, Michael Lynn, 1 Kenneth Place, Ocean View, Delaware.
Sir, do you,
Can you speak up, please?
Sure. I'm sorry. Michael Lynn, 1 Kenneth Place, Ocean View, Delaware.
sir, do you affirm the testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
So, thank you, Mr. Lynn. Likewise, you've heard everything I said today. Do you confirm everything that I had stated on the record this afternoon?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And I guess I'm particularly interested, we talked about the process, the building permit process, just the difficulties of that. would you echo that statement that it was unusual and difficult to get, just because of COVID as much as anything, to get through the whole process?
It was difficult. As the record shows, we were all walking and talking when we put the permit in, and probably within a month and a half, 2 months, we were remote. And all the communications were through either phone or email. And we had extensive communications back and forth because we were, the building department had an issue with our FAR. So when Vince had referenced 13 emails back and forth over the period of time from submission to the permit, much of those were changing and switching the plan to meet the FAR requirements. The point I would make, having built several, half a dozen or more homes in Rehoboth, what was so unusual about this was, first of all, putting the plans in the police department, and then it would come up and then it would come down. You could work through that. But at the end, when we were told to pick up the package, we pick up the package, and then we had a Zoom call instead of sitting down in a conference room and paper by paper going through all the permit. Well, I couldn't do the Zoom call because where I was, it was not. So we had a phone call, and Liz Lingo and the building inspector, Matt, were on the call. And that was the extent of the review of the file. We never received the notice that the fence was in any violation. And we worked off of the fact that the 3 site plans had shown the fence, pool fence, around the perimeter of the property on the building setback line.
Any
Any
questions?
questions for this witness? No, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And Mr. Donahue, if you, I'll go ahead and give your name and address for the record.
Afternoon. Greg Donahue, 163 Sandy Hook Road, Ocean Pines, Maryland.
Sir, do you affirm the testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Donahue. To the extent that you have knowledge about what I testified to, because I realize some of it was outside of your personal knowledge, but do you agree with everything that I explained to the board this afternoon that you have knowledge of?
I do.
Okay. Specifically, would you agree with that conversation, how I described that conversation between you and Mr. Janis?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That he didn't have any objection himself to the...
He did not have any objection to the fence, but
Okay.
he said it wasn't, up to him.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all the questions I had for Mr. Donahue, unless the board has any.
Any questions for Mr. Donahue? No, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your time. That's all I have. It's not super complicated, and it took a little bit more time than, a fence variance might. But I wanted to go through the steps that were involved so that you all got an understanding of all the approvals that went through. The fact that the fence was always shown there, the pool was always shown there, the pool design and discharge was always approved in the location it was in. Then we get to the end, and we have this issue, and rather than fight over a 6-foot fence where that would be a difficult ask, what we're doing is asking for just 6 inches on top of what can be put there.
Now's the time of the hearing where the board will ask questions if we choose to. I have a couple of questions. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Robertson.
Sure.
If you could put that photograph back up of the house in question from the corner.
The one that's their house? Or
Yeah, the new house.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so there it is. So it looks like, so the fence sits on the property line, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, but it appears that there is a landscaped strip of land between the roadway and the fence. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that's been the conversation there's been ongoing conversation with Liz Lingo about that as well, just to make sure that's right. So.
Okay, so who owns that strip of land between the fence and the street?
So I can't tell exactly where, just sitting here right now without, looking at it, but for the most part, that's the city's property. That's the road right of way.
Okay, Can you tell me what the width of that strip is? Is there any dispute?
The width of the strip between the pavement and the edge of the property line.
Right.
I just want to make sure I know what you're asking. Bear with me a second. I'll see the survey.
It's about 10.
So
Yeah, it could be 10, or it could be 6, something like that.
the edge of paving is listed on here. There's not an actual dimension listed, but the edge of pavement is shown, and with the scale, I would say it's anywhere from 10 to 15 feet off the edge of paving. Probably closer to 15, so.
That strip there is 10 to 15 feet wide, is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
yeah.
Okay. And who is maintaining that strip?
Well, it's not the city, so it's my clients are. So there were, and that was, I believe, part of what led to the conversation. It's where there was discussions about whether there'd be objection to the variance. Ms. Lingo's involved in, the landscaping design for that city property that will be put into effect by my clients, and they will maintain it. So they'll mow it, they'll water it, and everything else. So. Yeah, that's.
No, actually, it's not standard.
Yeah, it is. I can tell you, my house. I
live
wish.
in the city.
What are we doing? What are we doing? We're having a conversation here? If everybody's going to get a chance to speak, okay? But wait for your turn. All right. Now, the tree, this white oak tree that we were talking about that you referenced before?
Yes.
What's the distance between the existing fence and the white oak tree?
So it is. Bear with me. Again, that's not the dimension's not marked off, but when you look at this one, I don't know if you can see it. So it's right here. This is the building restriction line, which almost runs even with the edge of the house. So if that's 10 feet, it's probably 11.
And how big is the caliper? That's a big tree, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually, I think I said it was 40 feet, but when I look at this, yeah, it's 85 feet tall, and what this says is it's 40 inches. That's the caliper. Yeah.
So,
And that's actually, just for the record, that actually appears, so that I'm just not throwing a number out. On the exhibit, it has the Roman numeral 2 in the top right, which is the one that had the 2 cities' approvals on it.
I don't have any other questions for you, but I would like to ask some questions of the building inspector now. Mr. Janis, is there any dispute that the strip of land between the street, the paved street, and the fence is at least 10 feet wide?
I would say at least, yes, sir.
Is there any
Can we
dispute?
add to that, Mr. Chair, though, that, just to be clear, that strip of area, that area there is permit parking area, so it's not owned or somehow equitably owned by these applicants.
I understand.
I agree with that as well.
Mr. Janis, is there, if the fence were moved back to the setback line, would the tree interfere with the fence?
Looking at the survey, it's hard to tell on paper. From knowledge of the site, it may. It's going to be close to go by that tree.
So you're not disputing Mr. Robertson's assertion that the fence, if placed on the setback line, would interfere with the tree?
I guess the only thing that I would dispute is the size of footing nature. Fences don't require huge footers, so I don't know. I think the impact would be minimal.
I don't have any other questions. Anybody else have questions for anybody?
I have questions.
Barry, go ahead.
The statement "see fence restrictions" is going to be to both of you, one at a time. Define what you meant by "see fence restrictions" in terms of code. Which sections?
Yeah. So the house and the fence and the pool were all actually approved separately. At the beginning of the application process, there were FAR, FAR calculation differences. And so that required several separate submissions for the house itself. Eventually, we got to a point where the time clock was clicking for the applicant, and they wanted to get building. So we had released a building permit for just the house only while we worked through the different aspects of the pool and all the landscaping. And if you could repeat your question.
Yeah, just that statement, see fence restrictions, to ask a homeowner, because I'm interpreting the code, and Mr. Robertson quoted one section of the code. I'm looking at another section of the code, and I want to understand the correspondence that you had with the homeowners to explain the detail as to what were the exact restrictions. Because I'm looking at 270-43, Mr. Robertson looked at. Also, 270-41 also comes into play here. And I want to understand if that was clearly explained to the homeowners what the actual restriction was.
At that time, if memory serves, the homeowners were not involved in that process. It was the back and forth between myself and the contractor only.
Okay.
So what was intended by that was basically see the fence restrictions according to a corner lot implication.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that too?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I'm just going to point out that nothing that the builder or my client has supports that different level of permitting, because this is the building permit. And it was for the two-story single-family dwelling with pool. And I can sort of, wiggle it around here. But it doesn't say anything reserving any questions about a fence. It was a building permit for this property. The narrative that we submitted didn't even have the word fence in it. There was no reference to a fence on it. The 3 site plans which you have that we went through, there's no note approved but for fence. Everything was approved. I mean, and ultimately, the proof's right here in the building permit that was issued. There wasn't anything called out about a fence on that.
My hang-up is just that statement to me, see fence restrictions, is like, there's a lot of restrictions in here. And if that wasn't explained to the homeowners or to the contractor, I just think that's, I'll say it, a weak statement to put that on the building plan.
And can I respond to that, Mr. Chair? May I respond?
Sure.
So one thing I'd like the board to stay focused on is what was approved or not approved is only a small portion of your analysis today. I mean, it's pretty black letter law that if a building official issues a building permit that's not legal under the code, it doesn't somehow become legalized because he issued that permit. So everybody in the room agrees that a fence is at a location and at a height that's not currently code compliant. So the question is whether you're going to allow the fence there at a 48-inch height versus the 6 feet that it's at now. So when Mr. Janis said maybe to the contractor that he doesn't have a problem with it, but then said in his report that he thinks it should be denied, those two things can both be consistent. On the one hand, he maybe doesn't find it offensive or objectionable where the fence is now. But on the other hand, the code says it needs to be lowered. So he thinks deny the variance unless there's a good showing of reason why to leave it remain or to shave it down. Now, the reason that I agree with Mr. Robertson that sometimes a building official should be reluctant to say in a report whether they recommend denial or recommend approval is that you hear things in a hearing like this that maybe weren't known when he made that report. So for example, our thinking may have been that the fence is currently 6 feet tall. The applicant's asking for a 48-inch fence, which is what was shown on the plans that were submitted throughout. So some degree of work is going to have to be done to the existing fence. And we didn't know really whether that was going to be a tear it out, put a new fence in at some other height, or whether it can be, as Mr. Robertson suggested, shaved off. So, without having those facts or that testimony, it's hard to make a decision whether to recommend approval or denial. So I just want to make clear that his statements could have been, aren't necessarily inconsistent. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
And just one, and this is not technical or anything else, I appreciate Mr. Mendelis' explanation. I don't want you all to get the wrong idea when I say shave it off. That sounds really shoddy. That's not what's going to happen. I mean, it's going to be finished with it, it's capped.
Follow-up. I saw on the plans an aluminum fence. Is that what they'll replace?
No, actually, it's just so we don't have to go re-excavate the landscaping. It's going to be the same vinyl fence, but it'll only be
Thank you.
capped and 4 feet off the ground or 48 inches.
Do any of the board members have questions? Randy,
If we were to...
who are you addressing the questions?
I'd like to address that to Mr. Janis. If we were to approve this variance, is there anything that we need to be concerned about safety or anything like that for the difference between a 42-inch and a 48-inch fence in a location like that?
As long as the pool fence, as long as the fence meets the requirements for the pool restrictions, I don't see any differences between a 48-inch fence or a 6-foot fence.
We've discussed it. There's no line of sight issues or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, like traffic or safety in that regard, visually. And I'm thinking the difference between the 42 and the 48, not the 40.
Between 42 and 48, I don't believe there would be that much of a difference.
Any other questions from any board members?
I just reserved, could I just ask him about that easement on the side? Just curious. Oh, I'm sorry. Just curiosity. I mean, I live on the north side of town. We are not allowed to do anything with the 15-foot city easement on our side of the street, on our street. And I've lived in 3 houses on the north side of town since 1980. And we were never allowed. In fact, at one point, we had to dig up something that was in there. Is that a new process where you can landscape where the cars, where the permit parking is?
There is no landscaping allowed in that area. They did go to Park and Shade to get a variety of trees and brush removed from that area. There is some...
Easement? From
Correct.
the city easement?
Correct.
You can remove stuff from the city easement?
They went to Park and Shade to seek permission, and they received permission to do so. We do not allow landscaping in that area. However, if you want to create parking, which is, again, city parking, you are well with, we do allow that. We have allowed that on Henlopen Avenue during the lay of the outfall pipe as well.
Right, well, you've never allowed it on our street unless the house is really old and didn't have a driveway. So I'm just curious because I've never heard that ever before, and in fact heard quite the opposite since 1980. Thank you.
Ms. Conacy, if I could clarify a little bit, I don't think it's appropriate to refer to that area as an easement area because it's actually beyond your lot line. It's the city property.
City property,
Right.
okay.
So, and the city does authorize driveway entrances across that naturally.
right.
And the city has an interest in protecting that area for parking from people who would like to encroach upon it. Yeah.
No, I agree. That's what I've always thought.
Right.
Was the process. And that's why I was surprised that the city was approving a landscaping plan for their property. So that's all. I was just curious.
Any other questions from board members? Is there anyone from the public who would like to make comment? Then it would be your turn, ma'am. Come on up.
I'm fully vaccinated.
You're not under oath yet, ma'am. Wait until you're under oath.
February 24th. Fully vaccinated.
Name and address for the record, please.
Frances Kelleher, 318 Stokely Street.
Ms. Kelleher, do you affirm the testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Ms. Kelleher, please keep your voice up.
My voice
Speak
up.
loudly, yes. I wear hearing aids and...
I wore my shirt to keep my voice down. I'm usually accused of raising my voice too high. So anyway, I'll try to keep it at the right volume. So I built my house at 318 Stokely Street in 1992. It backs up to the swale area that comes from the tip of the lake. And so the houses at 503 and 405 Stokely Street Extension are like behind my lot. They have that really long lot because their property goes up to that swale area that's a non-buildable area, just FYI. I just want to put this out there so that nobody takes any offense at what I'm saying. I'm not trying to preach to the choir. I'm not trying to teach anybody anything they don't know, but I just wanted to throw this in, that I also have resided all my life up in the town of Bellefonte. And the town of Bellefonte's about the same size population as the city of Rehoboth Beach. However, one big difference is we don't have any paid employees. We don't have a mayor. We just have a president of our commission, our town commission. Everybody on the commission is volunteers. Everybody on the board of adjustment is volunteers. So all over the years of living up there in the town of Bellefonte, I did a lot of different volunteer work. And one of the things, doing a lot of work when they revised the land use code, and establishing board of adjustment, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, at that time, I actually took the course that the state of Delaware offers for board of adjustment members. Basically, kind of like it's like a couple of hour afternoon training to help local municipality people learn how to do things. So again, this is why I don't want you to be offended by anything I say, but I mean, I do remember the day I was there, and the very first thing that they said, and it really kind of struck me, you know, the most fundamental thing about granting a variance is that it should be done in rare, exceptional circumstances. So the code is there and should be enforced and held, and it should be the very rare times that there should be any exceptions. So I just wanted to say that on a new build like this, when I built my house too in 1992, I was very careful with the builder. The builder was very careful that we built the house within to code and within the setbacks, within the variances. So I have a very difficult time seeing that there should be any exceptions granted in this kind of a circumstance on a new build like this. And I also feel compelled to say that I don't think it's fair to expect that the responsibility that is on the builder and the homeowner to a degree with the builder, that it's the builder's responsibility to build to code. If they don't build to code, if they don't put the pool in the right spot, that's their problem and they should correct it. And I think the city needs to have that kind of a mindset. It's not about people doing things and, oh, because something wasn't caught or some detail wasn't spotted, that's the grounds for later on, after they've done the build, saying that it's, you know, that's a reason why they should be given the variance. The variance should be submitted and approved prior to when they're going to do something different or new. Usually variances come in for established or older homes, making changes or additions, On a new build, I mean, it is really a clean slate that the builder has and knows, and this man even said he's built homes in Rehoboth. They should know the setback rules. And that is all I have to say. And I'm sorry I blurted out during the meeting. I apologize for that. The thing I was trying to think of to say was that I live on 318 Stokely. We have the sidewalk out all along Stokely Street, and there's the strip of grass that goes beyond the sidewalk to the street. All the homeowners are expected to maintain that. That's what I was getting at, that it's standard that the homeowner maintains any city sort of property, if you will, I mean, sometimes it even extends to the sidewalks themselves. I'm not sure about in Rehoboth. I know in the town of Bellefonte, we're responsible also for if the sidewalk gets lifted by roots or whatever. And when that conversation came up, I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say it now, because Stokely Street Extension leads right up to the elementary school, I would actually hope that down the road, the city might build a safe sidewalk for the children to walk on, because right now they'd just be walking along that strip of the land along the edge of the people's properties. So that's all I have to say, I think. I just checked my notes.
You said a lot. You had a lot to say.
I'm sorry.
Well, you said a lot. You had a lot to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that I'm not just like coming in here to mouth off and say my opinion. I did do some training in Board of Adjustment, and I think the Board of Adjustment has a very strong responsibility to do things and in a way that you could even say, I did write down the Delaware Code for variances, that we are in line with the spirit, not just every, the nitty-gritty details. I mean, that's what you debate, but the whole spirit of a variance and what that is meant to be. And it's not meant to be, it isn't meant to be for people when they make mistakes because they were not careful in their own planning. And I think it's actually, I'm going to even say this, what I heard today was upsetting to me because I was surprised that there would be so much, no real finger pointing, but innuendos at the building inspectors and the city employees that it's sort of their fault because they didn't quite catch every little thing. I think that is not a right way for people to come. And again, I think if they wanted a variance on what they were going to build, that should have been part of requesting before the
I think
bill.
you made that point, but I want to thank you for coming up and speaking. I want to tell you that I think I took the same course you did. It's sponsored by the University of Delaware.
Yes, yeah. Maybe we were in the same class.
Maybe we were. I want to tell you one other thing, that we're all volunteers too.
Oh, well, yeah, no, and
All right?
we don't even pay our mayor, if you will, in the town of Bellefonte.
I don't think we do either.
We don't either.
We don't?
No, we don't.
So
No, the mayor isn't paid?
About that much.
Small amount, just $50 a meeting.
Well, we do have a few city.
We are off topic, though.
Do have, well, we do. And one thing I did have in my notes that I wanted to add is what really bothers me about some of the petitions for variances is that, and others, we do have city employees and building inspectors who are paid, and they put a lot of time in.
Madam, you're speaking to the choir.
Okay.
I fully appreciate that.
Okay,
All right?
and so
now, let's just keep our comments addressed to the
No, so
subject
I just think that is, people need to respect
okay.
the process.
We do. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to the people coming before you.
That's all right. Thank you. All right. Did anyone have any questions for Mrs. Gallagher?
Oh, sorry.
Any questions from the members of the board?
I just have one question.
Go ahead.
And that is,
Who's the question addressed to?
the question is to Matt or Glenn. My understanding, when I was going to be on the Board of Adjustment, I talked to a half a dozen different builders around town who do a lot of work in town. And I asked them, is our code difficult? Do you have trouble understanding what you're supposed to do? And without question, every one of them said no. It's very simple because homeowners complain about our code constantly.
I'm going to object to that. I appreciate the conversation, but that's testimony that's not in the record.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, because I don't believe it's the homeowner's fault either. I have to agree with.
You're going to be able to state your opinion? All right. Now, are there any other questions from any board members based upon the last few minutes of testimony and exchange here?
We do have one more person that wants to speak.
Okay. And who would that be?
Ms. Thurgood, I think, would like to.
Madam, come on up.
As a member of the public and a neighbor.
Okay.
Name and address, please, for the record.
My name is Melissa Thorogood, and my address is 403 Stokely Street Extended, and I'm adjacent to 405 Stokely
Ms.
Street.
Thorogood, do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
And please keep your voice up, okay?
Okay. I just wanted to respond to this lady. I am the neighbor that's directly adjacent to the homeowners that are in question.
Ma'am,
And I feel
please
like-
direct your comments to the board.
I feel like that if there is any objection to this fence, it would mostly affect the neighbors. It does not affect me. I do not object. I have spoken to almost all the neighbors on the street. The neighbors on the other side, Mr. and Mrs. Waltersdorf, have absolutely no objection to it. And I just feel like someone that is, I believe, in Country Club Estates behind me is not affected by this fence. We are all together. We have no problem with it. As to the Board of Adjustment, I feel like all variances are applied for under a different light. That's why they're hearings. You can't blanket say a variance should be denied. Every situation is different. And we see the neighbors, I'll represent the neighbors. We see no problem with this fence, and we'd like to see it approved.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just pointing out that there was one more person that
Okay.
wanted to speak. I just didn't know if you realized that Ms. Thorogood did.
I don't know if we mentioned this yet. Did we receive any correspondence on this case? In my packet, I see one email to the City of Rehoboth Beach Board of Adjustment, and it's in favor of the variance request. And it was signed by Mr. Waltersdorf, Melissa Thorogood, I guess that's the lady who just spoke, Amelia Knar, and Catherine Pryor. And they all live on, Mr. Waltersdorf is 503 School Lane, Melissa Thorogood, 403 Stokely Street Extended, Amelia Knar, 502 Newcastle Street Extended, and Catherine Pryor, 501 Stokely Street Extended.
That was originally submitted by them.
Okay.
That's part of the application, right?
All right. Anything else? Okay, and if there's no other discussion or questions or comments about this, then it's time for us to decide this case. So, is there a motion from any member of the board in regards to this variance request?
Do you want to remind people of the standards that used to read?
And before we go into the deliberations, let me just remind you that we're using the quick check standard here. And the four factors which we must consider are, number one, the nature of the zone where the property lies. Number two, the character and use of the immediate vicinity. Number three, whether removal of the restriction on the applicant's property would seriously affect the neighboring properties and their uses. And number four, whether failure to remove the restriction would create an exceptional practical difficulty for the owner. So those are the criteria we have to use. Does anybody want to make a motion? Somebody's going to have to, so, so who's ready to do it? And it's not going to be me. So.
I like to try to make the motion, whether I get my words out correctly. I'd like to make a motion to approve the variance request. And the area would be under hardship. I believe the homeowners have done everything.
Before you go any further, I think what the term you mean to use is exceptional practical difficulty.
Thank you.
As opposed to hardship.
I always make a shorthand called hardship, exceptional practical difficulties here. The homeowners have done what the city has asked, and I believe they've shown good faith here. And I would, like I said, I would like to make a motion to approve this variance request.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to ask each of you to announce your vote, and then I'm going to ask you to explain your reasoning for the vote that you gave. And we'll start with you, Randy.
All right. I vote in favor of the motion. I do believe that it seems there was some confusion as to what exactly was required here through nobody's fault in terms of the times that we were in. I think there is certainly some concern about the what may happen with this tree, and they have made every effort by moving the pool and working with saving this tree, which they did not have to do. I mean, obviously it would have been mitigated in some way, but there is good faith there. And I don't believe that it's going to cause any problem for any of the neighbors or any safety. So therefore, I'd like to see us grant the variance.
Okay. Well,
Sure, Jerry. Same reasons that both Barry and Randy has said. I'm also holding this letter here from the 4 neighbors that actually surround the property. And I actually did a little map to see exactly where they are, and they perfectly surround this property, and they're in full support here. So, so it's not adversely affecting the neighbors around the perimeter of this property. So I vote aye.
okay.
And I'd like to vote in favor of my motion for what Randy and Walt said. And I do agree with the first thing that Randy said, that there was a confusion in the beginning of this. So I vote aye to approve the motion.
Jan?
I vote aye to approve the motion because I believe there is exceptional practical difficulties for the homeowners. I do have concerns about a builder who doesn't know what the height of a fence should be and a fencing contractor who doesn't know what the height of a fence would be. This is the second fence issue that we've had. So I have concerns about that, but it's not the homeowner's fault. And so I vote to support the variance.
And I also vote to support the variance. That makes it unanimous. My reasoning is that there's an exceptional practical difficulty here. I know that the city puts a great store in the health and the number of its trees throughout the city. And there's been testimony today that moving the fence would affect the white oak tree that grows in the backyard, also the drainage plan which was approved for that property. I don't believe that this fence would adversely affect in any way the character and use of the immediate vicinity. And for those reasons, I am voting in favor of the variance request. So by a vote of 5-0, the variance request is passed.
Thank you very much.
Okay, our next point of business, I guess, is adjournment. Am I right? Yeah.
So you just directed that we have that conversation on our agenda next
Okay.
week about the start.
So Ann, if you could remember to just put the start time for the meeting on the next agenda, next meeting, we'll set a time for the meetings. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? None. So we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.